Despite a roster full of superstar names, the New York Rangers failed to make the playoffs last year in what was an incredibly dysfunctional season. But with a new head coach, do the Rangers have a new outlook on life? This is the 2025-26 Deep Dive on the New York Rangers. Hello and welcome to team number 12 on my preseason power rankings, the New York Rangers. And this is the highest team who did not make the playoffs last year. So shout out to the Rangers for that. It really was a incredibly dysfunctional season for the Rangers, and it was such a weird year because they really didn't have like any major injury that like sidelined them for a good portion of the year. Like they had guys miss time, but not to the extent of a team like Utah, for instance, who we talked about earlier, where like guys like Connor Ingram and missed a good portion of the year. Sean Durzi was out for a while. The Rangers really didn't have a major injury that like you can point to that derailed their season, right? Like Igor Shesterkin didn't miss like months of time, and the Rangers like massively fell below expectations. Like I think they were my number 2 team going into the season in my power rankings, and they completely missed that mark. And some people may say that this is too high for them as well, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I have them 12th for a reason, but they're such an interesting team because on paper, like this team should be good. Their goaltending is phenomenal with Igor Shesterkin and even Jonathan Quick as a backup, despite the step down he took last year. I still think he's a competent backup. They still have guys like Adam Fox. They went out and spent a ton of money on Gavrikov. The offense is still has pieces in it that I like. I think that there's definitely some question marks throughout the roster, but they kind of have this new, this wave of like younger players coming into the lineup now too. So I think there's a lot of potential hope here for the Rangers. It's just a matter of bringing it all together. And of course, the biggest acquisition, in my opinion, for them was Mike Sullivan. And that's really my X factor here because Mike Sullivan's somebody who I've really liked as a head coach for a long time. And I think that he was underserved at the end of his term in Pittsburgh just because of how poor that roster was. There really wasn't like much you could do with it. And I really think that the move on from Mike Sullivan wasn't because he was bad. It was just it was time for the Penguins to kind of go in a different direction and get a new voice, in the room. And it really gives him an opportunity now to kind of reset himself and reshape himself here with the Rangers. And I do think that this is going to be a place where he'll be able to find some success, right? This is a team that has struggled, in terms of their expected goals numbers for a long time. And it's something that I've been critical of them for is the fact that like they've really relied heavily on Igor Shesterkin to win them games because they just don't generate enough chances compared to where they should be. And I think that Mike Sullivan's going to help that area. His systems have been very good at getting the most out of his players in terms of like chance creation. And I really think that this could be the year where the Rangers are no longer just relying on goaltending and their scoring to carry them through games, right? I think they need to start dictating play and they need to start pushing play themselves. And I believe that Mike Sullivan should be able to get that out of him because he's been pretty good at doing that in the past. And in saying that, we jump to the positional ranks on this team, and like they look solid, right? Like offense is 13th, defense is 15th, goaltending is 3rd, special teams is 13th, and I have coach and culture at 14th. Again, because like I think Chris Drury's made some really questionable moves over his tenure. But again, like I really like Mike Sullivan, so it evens out to about 14th. And not to say that Chris Drury, like everything Chris Drury's done has been bad, but I think that there's been enough bad and good that it's kind of evened out in that sense. So we jump into the coaching culture, and again we start with Chris Drury, and like I think that his asset management has been a little questionable, right? I think moving off of Kaapo Kakko may have not been the right time to do that. I think that the JT Miller trade was fine in terms of like the value they gave up for him, but I don't know if that was necessarily the right move to make at that point. We've seen the debacle with Jacob Trouba that happened. Obviously, Chris Kreider's now gone, so he's done an interesting job kind of turning over this roster. And I don't think that the roster now is bad by any sense of the word. Obviously, I have them 12th right now in my rankings, so they're definitely like in that playoff like group, and it's really hard to tell what the full like long-term direction is here, right? Like he kind of like was able to rebuild this team on the fly a little bit. Obviously, moving out Keandre Miller as well, getting Scott Morrow in, and some picks from Carolina. it's just been kind of a strange like back and forth in terms of like he'll bring in JT Miller and then he'll move out, like some of their young pieces, but then he'll move out like a veteran in order to get young pieces back. And it's just like there's no consistency in the moves that he's made, and that's why his rating is so low. I don't necessarily think that he's been awful, but I would like to see a bit more consistency in kind of where this team's supposed to go, because I don't know what the goal is, right? Like I'm assuming that they're trying to still win a Stanley Cup with this core, but they kind of reset the deck a little bit, and that might not be a bad thing, but I need to see the full vision come through here before I can boost him up anymore. On the other hand, Mike Sullivan, I think, is a fantastic head coach. Like I think what he was able to do with even a mediocre Pittsburgh team was really, really good, and I definitely think the only reason why he moved out of Pittsburgh was just because his time was kind of up there, and they had done what he's going to do in Pittsburgh, and he didn't really want to be there for the full rebuild, and they wanted to go a different direction as they kind of rebuild the roster at Pittsburgh. So overall, it evens out to this team looking like a playoff team, right? Like I think that the expectation for New York should be that they're going to make the playoffs, and that should be the end goal here. I think that anything less than a playoff berth is a massive disappointment here for this team. And even then, moving that forward, like I don't know if losing the first round would be considered a successful season for Rangers fans, right? Like this team still has enough star power, and they're spending enough money on their top end players that I truly think that like anything less than what a second round appearance is might be a failed season here, especially with the way the Metro looks. Like it's really, last year was such a abject failure for this team that I think anything less than like a complete turnaround for them is going to be tough for this, for the Chris Drury management team to hang on to what they have here. And I think that they've done a good job putting themselves in position here, at least to remain competitive. And I definitely think that Mike Sullivan's going to be a big part of that. You look at their numbers last year, and this is kind of the indicative of what I'm talking about, right? Like last year, their expected goals numbers were better than they usually are, right? Like their split between 6th in goals for and 13th in expected goals for was better than where they usually end up as a team. But the defense was really bad, right? Like 23rd in goals against, 28th in expected goals against. Their power play wasn't very good. Their penalty kill was good, but the goal share being 23rd, it's really hard to win a lot of games in that sense. And even like the power play, generated a decent amount of chances. They just couldn't finish. It was kind of the opposite story of what the offense was doing 5-on-5, and situations like that tell me that the power play should just regress back. Like it was just an odd year of not being able to finish. So I'm not too concerned about that. I mean, like Igor didn't have the strongest season for what we've been used to him, but even then they were still like a fringe top 10 team in terms of goaltending. So it's there's a lot to like here in New York, right? Whereas some of these other teams we've talked about that like push for a playoff spot, like some of their underlying numbers indicated that they were worse off than where they finished. I think the Rangers were kind of opposite. Like this is a team that probably shouldn't have finished 22nd in the NHL last year, but it was just kind of a weird mix of this team trying to reshape their identity, moving out, Jacob Trouba really early. That definitely had an effect on the locker room. We saw the pushback on that. We've seen some players speak out about, the treatment and stuff that was going on, and that wasn't very good. It's been a really, I think that resetting the deck here a little bit, kind of reshaping what this management or what this leadership group looks like for the team, it should end up being good for them. I think that the season away from kind of the chaos of last season should indicate that things might be heading in a better direction here for the Rangers. And I think, you kind of have to hope so, especially after the real PR disaster that was last season. But, we jump to this offense here, and there's some pieces on this offense I really like, right? Like, first of all, Artemi Panarin is, one of the best offensive creators in the league still. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. I think part of that is just because of, how bad the Rangers were. We weren't really able to see him play in a ton of, like, really meaningful games because the team was just such a disaster with everything else going around them. He really didn't get to showcase that, but he's still very, very much one of the better, offensive creators in the league. But, you look at, the other players on this team that are interesting, right? Like Vincent Trocheck is a guy they brought in who I didn't love the contract at the time. I still don't love the deal, but, he's still a competent top 6 center. JT Miller is technically their best center, and Mika Zibanejad as well. So, Trocheck being like their third best center is fine. Zibanejad for me, and I talked about this last year, and I kind of got some pushback on it, and then Mika Zibanejad had the season he did last year, and it's just the inconsistencies in Zibanejad's game really weigh on me in terms of like how much I trust him to be like an everyday player, right? Like as a secondary option, I think Zibanejad is fine because he can take over a game. Like he does have that ability, and for a secondary option, you want somebody who can do that. But it's just he doesn't do consistently enough for me to fully believe in him as a top tier premier offensive forward in the league. And I really think last year kind of proved my point on that, where he was incredibly inconsistent, and even more so than what he usually is, and had a really down year. But you look at some of the other pieces on this team, right? Like Alexis Lafreniere has kind of stepped into being a very, very useful forward, and I think that he doesn't get enough credit for what he is as a player. And then they have Gabe Perreault, Brennan Othman, who are both young players on this team that are going to try to make something work. Sam Carrick they brought in last year, so there's definitely some intriguing pieces on what this team is going to do. They also have Matt Rempe, who I'm not really going to talk about because if you've followed me at all, you know what my thoughts are on Matt Rempe. But hey, I mean, Rangers fans think he's fun, so good for you, I guess. But like aside from that, like the forward core, I think is good enough to get them through, especially if those young players can take steps forward, right? Like Brandon Hoffman, obviously, Gabe Perreault, who both have low ratings, are guys who just haven't played enough for me to rate them in any other way. But players like that, I think, are definitely going to be guys that can, we could see taking a decent step forward this year and being more versatile in terms of what they could be overall for the Rangers. And those are guys that are going to need to step up, because this team needs that secondary push that they're not going to get from that guys like Sam Carrick aren't really going to bring to this team. So those young players are going to be given an opportunity here and are going to have to step up. Kind of what we saw with the Kaapo Kakko situation, and we saw Lafreniere get some opportunities when he came onto the team. And I think to me it's kind of the same thing with those young players. Again, this time they're going to have to get they're going to be given opportunities to succeed, and they're going to have to earn those spots. So let's start here with Panarin, and obviously, like I said, Panarin is still one of the best offensive creators in the league. His numbers are fantastic. He's a phenomenal power play guy. He's a phenomenal offensive creator. Obviously his finishing is fantastic. His passing is great. He really is like just really good at doing a lot of different things offensively. But heading into a contract year, it's a big question, right? Is he going to re-sign in New York? And could we really see a new wave of this Rangers core that they built really around Panarin, right? They went out and they made that big signing, and this was supposed to be the window here, right? With the Adam Fox, Lafreniere, Kakko, that was supposed to be what was going to win them, get them into the promised land, and it hasn't yet, right? They got close a couple times, but it really hasn't fully panned out yet for them, being a Stanley Cup champion. And it'll be interesting to see if Panarin decides to hit the market again, right? Like, he'll be 33. It'll be, I think it's really an opportunity for him to, potentially, see what else is out there for like a final third of his career, really. And maybe that is with the Rangers. I think this year will be very telling for what that is. And, we talk about a team here that has had a lot of question marks in terms of like off-ice issues. Like, this is another one that's going to kind of loom over them, right? Like, is Panarin going to come back? What is the plan there? And, he's certainly still an extremely useful player, right? I mean, you look at his offensive numbers and they're phenomenal. The defense isn't, great, but again, he's a, scoring winger. I don't know what you expect from him. So I'm really intrigued to see kind of what this looks like. Because if Panarin has another great season and the team underachieves, it's we're talking about a guy here who wants to go and win, and I could see him potentially testing the market and seeing what else is out there for him. Because I think an 8-year deal is out of the question anyway, based on his age. I mean, I wouldn't sign him for 8 years, but hey, I mean, if you want to go for it, I guess. So I think that there is a possibility he just goes to the market and sees what's out there. But think that this is going to be a big year for the Rangers, and they have to be successful, right? They have to prove that this is a team that can still win with the core they have, and it's kind of everything else here that needs to be built up around them, and to make that work. And for me, Panarin is such a fascinating player because he can still be that game-changing offensive guy that a lot of the teams that we've talked about here so far have needed. So I think it would be interesting to see what his where his mind's at, and as the season kind of goes on, I think we'll get a better indication of that. But in terms of what he can bring to the Rangers this year, I mean, Panarin's going to be their leading scorer. He's going to be their primary offensive driver, and he's going to be one of the best offensive wingers in the league. I think that's pretty straightforward for what Panarin is at this point. JT Miller was somebody they brought in partially through last season, and I've been critical of what JT Miller is. Just because of a bit of the inconsistencies. His defensive numbers are awful, and that's fine. His power play numbers are decent enough, but offensively he's really he has kind of leveled out to the level that that I'm comfortable with having him at, right? Like he's going to be your, a great, secondary contributor. He's going to be a good complementary player, and he does really complement what the Rangers want to do here fairly well. Do I think that he's, still going to be a 100-point player consistently? Probably not. But in terms of what he can be, as a secondary option here to kind of, stabilize the offense and give them, a bit more dynamic play on a different line, or potentially playing with Panarin, he does do a very good job of that, and it gives them that secondary window, similar to what he was doing in Vancouver, similar to what he was doing with the Rangers, the first time he was there. I'd like to see a bit more. Like, I think consistency is kind of the thing across the board here for the Rangers, and we're going to touch on that as we move forward. And obviously last year was a disaster. I actually think that, JT Miller had a pretty solid showing overall in New York. If you kind of look at it from a big perspective, I think that he was, about what I expected him to be in terms of his production level. And it's just going to be about, like, if he can recreate what he did last year, then Rangers fans are going to be happy with him, right? They're going to be pretty satisfied overall with that, or they should be at least. So he's not going to be the primary guy, but he doesn't have to be, except Panarin. So having him as like a secondary option, I think is a good place for him to be at this point. So I think JT Miller is kind of an X factor in terms of what he can bring to this team. If he can step up and be a true number 2 guy, then the Rangers might have pretty deadly top 6 brewing if he's kind of able to lead that second line and be a very good contributor to that. Alexis Lafreniere is somebody who I think gets absolutely disrespected because he's not putting up the 100-point seasons that you expect from a first overall pick. Doesn't mean that he's a bust. Doesn't mean that he's been bad. Sure, he's not the offensive creator that Tim Stützle is, who we just talked about in the last video. But his development here as a secondary, like, second line winger has been really good. Right, like, I think that he gets really disrespected in terms of the discourse around him, because, like, I definitely don't consider having a very strong top 6 forward on your team a bust. Like, I can't wrap my head around that. Right, that's just not, like, was he the right pick at number 1? Probably not, but that doesn't mean that he sucks. And if you look at his numbers, like, he's pretty clearly good across the board. Right, like he gets pucks to high danger areas, whether it's in direct contributions or in assists. He's able to play a really, really good rush offensive game. He builds off that a ton. He takes a ton of shots off high danger chances. He gets pucks to high danger areas on passes. And I really think, like, if you give him full top line offensive contributing opportunities here with Panarin, Lafreniere could have a really strong season offensively. Like, I think this is somebody you could look at and be like, at the end of the year, and you're looking at him and you're like, wow, he put up a pretty good amount of points this year. And it could be a very surprising year for people who don't really, follow what Lafreniere's been doing, on a micro level. And his macros haven't been great. He hasn't put up, a ton of points, especially for a first overall pick, right? He hasn't become like, an award candidate for people, which so many people expect because Connor McDavid did it. And now everybody's got to be, the greatest player on the planet the year after they're drafted. And that's just not what Lafreniere is, right? Like that's not who he was going to be out of the draft. Despite the hype that the media consistently gives to first overall picks, he wasn't somebody that I saw as like a franchise changing player. And he, at this point, he's been good for what he was supposed to be. This is what I expected Lafreniere to look like. This 5 years out, or whatever it is, 4 or 5 years out, and he's been really solid. And I think that the discourse around Lafreniere needs to change, because if you're expecting him to be a 100-point player carrying the Rangers to the Stanley Cup, that's just not what he was going to be. That's never what he was going to be. And if people can accept that, then we can kind of change what the conversation is around what the expectations are for him. And I think once we can do that, reframe what the look is for Lafreniere, then people can appreciate that he is a really, really good player, kind of on both ends of the ice too. I mean, his zone entries are fantastic. He's very good at, his retrievals are solid enough especially for a winger, but he's just a very useful, like, toolsy player. And I think that he's definitely come into his own here on the Rangers and kind of found a home as that type of player. And it looks really good overall now. And I think that Rangers fans should be happy with what Lafreniere looks like. And I think he gets a lot of unnecessary hate for what he is. And I kind of want to help change that discourse a little bit, because I really like Lafreniere as a player. Vincent Trocheck, like I said kind of in the beginning, it was a contract that I didn't love at the time, and I still don't really love it. I think that, as you're, the third best quote unquote center on this team, I think that he's fine for that role, but and he works well enough in the role that he's given with the Rangers. Like, they found a good way to kind of maximize his potential. And I do think that Vincent Trocheck's a player that should work well in a Mike Sullivan system. I think he fits a lot of what Mike Sullivan's looking for in players like this. So in that sense, like, I do think that we could see an improvement year out of Vincent Trocheck in terms of, like, overall production, in terms of his, maybe even defensive ability. We could see some growth out of it, just in terms of his overall value to the Rangers. I do think that a Mike Sullivan system should be able to help him in those areas more than the teams were, than the Gerard Gallant, Peter Laviolette teams were. So I do see some potential regression back to being a true top six center here for Trocheck. But even if that doesn't happen, if you get some production out of Zibanejad and Miller, then Trocheck's kind of fine in that role. And it's weird because, like, he's going to get a ton of love for the U.S. team, and I think that there's so many better options for Team USA in the bottom of their lineup. Like, his defensive numbers aren't very good, and his offensive, like, creativity isn't insane. Like, there's not a ton of, like, huge upside for a guy like Vincent Trocheck. So it's kind of a strange player, but if they're comfortable with it, go for it, I guess. But I want to see a bit more. I want to see Trocheck take true form of being like the second line center on this team, or not second line center because he's probably going to be on the Panarin line, but just the second best center on this team, let's put it that way, this season. Really push for that, because I think that he's been a bit of a letdown overall in terms of what the expectations were when they signed him compared to what he's been. Like, I think he's been fine, but I'd like to see a bit more out of Vince Trocheck. And again, like, I think a Mike Sullivan system is going to be really helpful for him. Mika Zibanejad. Oh boy, Mika Zibanejad is somebody that I've been very critical of over the last couple of years. I think that he is one of the most streaky players in the NHL in terms of, like, game to game, you really don't know what you're going to get out of him offensively. Defensively, he's been fairly stable. He's been fine. But in terms of his offense, right, like, this is somebody who could, pop off for, a bunch of, like, multi-point games in a row and then just go, like, weeks without anything. And people love to talk about the highs in Mika Zibanejad's game and then not discuss the low points very much. And again, like, I think, as a secondary option, as a guy who can, have strong games every once in a while, he's useful in that role. But I just think, relying on Mika Zibanejad to be, like, your, part of that mainstay offensive creation for the Rangers here, I think it's at that point, the part of his game is just not there. Like even in his like prime, like he still had stretches where he kind of disappear for a couple games, and I just I I don't think we're gonna get a game to game clear base of what Mika Zibanejad is going to be. And at this point in his career, like if he's the secondary, and again, like they brought in JT Miller, who I think is a better offensive player at this point. I don't think that's like a hot take to say. And I think that's actually going to help Zibanejad, right? I think that giving him, less responsibility, giving him, an easier quality of competition is going to help him, fully develop into being, a very strong secondary scoring option. And if he can, find a bit of stability and get a bit of a baseline formulated here, then I think we could see a better overall valued Zibanejad by the end of the season. So I do think that a guy like JT Miller is going to help. Again, like I think Mike Sullivan's going to help too. I think that Mike Sullivan's awesome, and he's going to get kind of the most out of what this team is. So maybe a bounce back season for Zibanejad is kind of not really something that you shouldn't, it's something that you should be fairly expectant of going into this season. So overall, like he's a player that I think is fairly polarizing among Rangers fans. For me, I'm on like the lesser, so like he's not somebody that I love, but again, as a secondary option, he's an interesting player. I think that the $8.5 million cap hit for the next 5 years is a lot. But again, like if he can develop into a very good secondary scorer, somebody who can have games where he just pops off and kind of takes over a game, and then the Rangers are able to have consistency at the top of their lineup with guys like JT Miller and Antonio Panarin, and even Lafreniere to a lesser extent, then Zibanejad's value, becomes a lot higher for what the Rangers are going to do. But if he's going to be asked to be, one of their primary offensive creators, I just think they're going to be let down by the end of the season. Sam Carrick, somebody I want to talk about. Sam Carrick, again, really, really strong defensive center, low event guy, and I think for a team like the Rangers who at least have been very reliant on kind of weathering the storm defensively, and then, being very advantageous up front and just heavily outscoring their expected numbers year over year. I think guys like Sam Carrick are going to be valuable to this team because they can help that weathering of the storm, right? They can help, allow fewer expected goals against, allow fewer high danger chances. And obviously you have guys like Igor Shesterkin in net where, even if that does happen, you don't have to worry about it too much, but allowing Igor to not have to win you games making 50 saves a night it does help you, and Sam Carrick's a very strong defensive fourth line center, and again, for a team like the Rangers who are built as this this glass cannon type team, I really think that guys that are just low event that you can put out on the ice and nothing's going to happen on either end are actually pretty valuable for a team like this, just because of how much they've been relying on just weathering the storm game to game, and even in the playoffs, right? Like you look at some of those playoff runs that they had the last couple of years, and it's very much been, we're just going to let Igor win the game for us, and then we're going to score 2 goals a game, but we're going to do it on 13 shots, and that's how we're going to win hockey games. And it worked enough for them in those moments, but I think really improving the offense is going to be the biggest thing here, and improving the consistency in the offense. But even if that doesn't happen, or if it happens to a lesser extent than what I'd hope with Mike Sullivan, guys like Sam Carrick are going to be important because they'll be guys you can put out and just not much is going to happen when they're on the ice. And for a team like this, that's definitely going to be valuable. I talked a little bit about Brandon Hoffman and Gabe Perreault, and I think both players, I'm interested in. Hoffman, obviously less so. I think that his ceiling as a winger is a lot lower than obviously Gabe Perreault's is. But I think that when you're looking at these guys here, Gabe Perreault is really going to be asked to jump in and be a secondary contributor on this team pretty much right away, right? I think that that's going to be the biggest ask here. He doesn't have to be like a superstar because they already have Panarin and Miller, like I said, and even guys like Zibanejad. But if he can stabilize, a second line, be a 50-point guy, I think that's going to be really, really successful for what the Rangers are trying to do here. If they can find some stability in Gabe Perreault and he can have a very strong season, and really help stabilize the bottom, the middle six of this lineup, even the bottom half of the top six, that's going to be very important to this team, right? And for a team like the Rangers here, who have a lot of money tied up in their big name players, getting young players to step in and be very productive on small deals is going to make or break their team. We saw it with Panarin in Chicago, right, where he came in on a rookie contract and was insanely productive for them. So I definitely think that that's going to be a big case here for Gabe Perreault, and I expect a decent season out of him, right? Like, obviously I talked about Ivan Demidov being my Calder pick, and I think he'll get a lot more top end opportunities, whereas guys, the Rangers have, I think, probably more guys that they can trust to play in those big moments than the Canadians do. So Gabe Perreault might not be a Calder favorite, but I think that he'll be very much like in that secondary group of guys that like have really, really strong seasons, but just didn't get the same, point production because of, role and deployment that, some of the top end rookies will. But, I definitely think Gabe Perreault could be, is there a world where Gabe Perreault ends up being the best rookie this year? Maybe, yeah, maybe. I definitely could see that being a possibility, but I wouldn't go out and expect it necessarily. But I do like his game overall, and I think he'll play a pretty big role. Brendan Othmann, on the other hand, I think is going to be more of a second, like a kind of a bottom six contributor. But if he can bring some offensive spark, in a bottom six, that's going to be very useful to the Rangers here as well. So I think both these guys are players who are going to be important to the Rangers for different reasons. But I think both need to have productive years here if the Rangers are going to be, true playoff caliber team, and a team that doesn't necessarily just squeak into the playoffs, but can make some noise, in the first round. Potentially, I think both these players need to have successful years in their own way, and like I said, I have pretty good faith that both will. But they're two players to definitely keep an eye on here for the Rangers' success. I think they're both X factors in their overall success as a team. Jumping into the blue line here, obviously, Gavrikov was the big addition that they made, but this blue line to me is, the top end of it is good, and I think their bottom end isn't bad. I just think that there's a limit to the success of this team, right? Like, obviously you have Adam Fox, who I absolutely love. I think the Adam Fox hate is insane to me. And we'll jump into Adam Fox in a second here, but I think as a two-way defender, he might be, near the top of the league in terms of, true two-way defenders in the NHL here. And I think that the hate that he gets as a defenseman, I think the Four Nations tournament did him a lot of disservice, which is sad because it was like 4 games. So there really wasn't much to go on there, but I mean, hey, people are going to look at that, and it was big in the lights, and obviously he didn't get playoff time, so people look at that, and he struggled in that tournament. But I think that the 4 games that he played in the Four Nations are not indicative of what Adam Fox is as a defender. So we need to kind of pump the brakes on the Adam Fox discourse in that sense. Gavrikov, on the other hand, again, a guy they paid a lot of money to, one of the better shutdown defenders in the NHL, doesn't do a ton offensively. Not a guy I would have handed the contract out to, simply because low event players don't bring a ton of overall value to a team. But hey, I mean, he is one of the best shutdown defenders in the NHL, so I can't. Again, the Rangers' biggest issue here has been the weathering of the storm kind of situation here, and Gavrikov should help in that sense. So there you go. On the blue line here, Scott Morrow is a guy they got in the K'Andre Miller trade. Obviously, there isn't a ton of tape on Scott Morrow. He didn't play a whole lot in Carolina, so his ratings are a little, they're very speculative in terms of like the small sample that I've seen. So don't read a ton into like the B, EVD and the D, the B EVO and the D EVD. I think those are things that could change, that could fluctuate quite a ton this season. As for the rest of the blue line here, I mean, Brandon Schneider, Carson Soucy, Will Borgen are all, fine options at the bottom of this lineup. I think it's a blue line that has a pretty high floor, but I think the ceiling is limited unless Scott Morrow can really, really develop into a very good secondary offensive defenseman on this team behind Adam Fox. Then they get a bit more, they get a bit more positive value there if that's the case. But overall, like I do like this blue line. It's middle of the pack for me, just because it doesn't have that super high ceiling, but the floor on it is fairly high. Like I don't see this blue line unless there's injuries. By the end of the year, like I can't see them being any lower than like
15th, 16th in terms of like if you're to rank the blue lines at the end of last season. So, like in that case, like I really don't see a ton of drop off here. But the ceiling I do question outside of like Adam Fox and potentially Scott Morrow. Let's talk about Adam Fox, man. There is the Adam Fox hate. I don't understand, man. I mean, he is consistently now been one of the best defensemen in the NHL, right? He's in the top 5 to 7 conversation, right? Like if you're gonna, he could even be higher than that depending on the day. But like anybody saying that he's like overrated is insane in my mind, right? Like he has put up consistently some of the best offensive numbers for defensemen here. I mean, obviously he's not, he's not doing Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes things, but he's like right there in that next tier behind them, right? Like he has been very good in that sense, right? His even strength defense has been phenomenal too. It's been significantly better than both those players. And in that sense, he really might be the best two-way defenseman in the NHL. I get there's other people in contention for that spot, but Adam Fox certainly deserves to be, have his name thrown in the ring there. His power play numbers are fantastic. His penalty kill numbers are fantastic. That's extremely rare for these defensemen, right? If you've been watching this series from the start, there's very few defensemen or players in general that are putting up top of the league, even strength, and top of the league, special teams numbers in their respective areas. He can play truly anywhere on the ice. You can put him in any situation. He's going to find success. The hate for Adam Fox it blows my mind. I truly don't understand. I think there's easily a conversation for him being a top 5 defenseman in the NHL. And yeah, I don't get the hate and the discourse around Adam Fox. I get it. He had a bad 4 Nations. They had 3 days worth of practice to get familiar with their teams, if that, and you had 4 games to play. Like every player has a bad 4-game stretch. Like I'm sure I could find a 4-game stretch that Connor McDavid sucked. Like it's crazy. I don't get the Adam Fox hate. He's so good everywhere on the ice. He's maybe the most 5-tool-y player in the NHL in terms of that, if you want to use pitching or a baseball reference. There's not a whole lot to say about him in terms of like analysis beyond that, but like he's so good everywhere, and I get it. He plays for the Rangers. People like to hate the Rangers. Maybe that's what it is. Big market team that had limited success last season. I get it. Maybe that's the issue, but like I don't know. He's so good at everything, and the Adam Fox hate needs to cool down. And I'm hoping he has a Norris level season this year. I'm hoping that the points come like crazy, and then he gets into the Norris conversation, and then we can kind of quiet all that. Because Adam Fox is great. Vladislav Gavrikov is the big signing this summer, and Gavrikov really turned things around for me in terms of perception in LA. Like he really found a very, very strong role as a truly elite defensive defenseman. And you have somebody that I didn't love in Columbus. Like I thought that his value had kind of peaked. And I still think that like in an ideal situation, Gavrikov isn't your second best defenseman because he doesn't have that offensive side of his game, right? And this is kind of a philosophy-based thing here in terms of team building. But like we talk about a guy like Adam Fox, right? Adam Fox is a bad example. Let's talk about like Erik Karlsson, right? When Erik Karlsson was really good, his ability to create offense created value for the team despite the fact his defensive numbers sucked, right? Like whereas if you have a defensive defenseman, like a pure defensive defenseman who isn't going to generate anything, nothing's happening while he's playing, and nothing happening means it's less likely for you to generate offense and generate chances than if everything's happening. And I just think that like historically the pure defensive defensemen haven't brought as much value to a team as the the two-way defenseman or even an pure offensive defenseman. So I have my concerns about what the ceiling that Gavrikov's going to extend for or elevate for this blue line. Do I think that he's going to be useful to the Rangers? Absolutely. Right, like I'm not saying that it was a bad signing in terms of like what his usefulness will be, right? I think like the Ivan Provorov signing, which was a similar cap hit, was awful. But Gavrikov's going to add a ton of value defensively. There's no question about that. right? He's going to add a physicality, which people love, but he's also going to add just a great defensive presence. I just think that the lack of offense limits how valuable he can be, and that's all I'm saying. Is there's big limitations to this signing. I don't know if there's a better option, especially for what the Rangers need. I think Gavrikov fits what the Rangers need on the blue line really well, but it is limiting in terms of what Gavrikov's going to bring to New York, and I think you just kind of have to understand that as you're analyzing this move. Again, I don't dislike the signing, I don't hate it, but I just think paying first line premier money to a defenseman who isn't going to create anything for you offensively is a really, really risky proposition, right? Like Noah Dobson, for instance, is kind of a good comp in terms of contract size. Obviously, their ages are different, but even going into next year, like Noah Dobson, I think is going to bring more value to Montreal than Gavrikov will for the Rangers, just based on in terms of like the cap hits, if that makes sense, right? Now, like Gavrikov, again, it's going to be so much more valuable than like an Ivan Provorov. So if you want to compare it that way, but like again, floor is very high for Gavrikov, the ceiling isn't. And that's just my point, right? If I'm paying top end guys, I'd rather get high ceilings on my players. But again, that's a philosophy thing. Some people might disagree with that. It's not necessarily a right or wrong thing. It's just I like upside when I'm paying top end guys. But that's besides the point. I like Gavrikov. I think he fits the team really well. I don't have an issue with him as a player. Like, he'll be good. Like, he's going to do what he's paid to do. Like, that's not an issue here. It's not like Provorov, where I just don't like the contract because I don't think the player's very good. I don't love the contract because it's not the type of player that I would have given that kind of money. But again, the Rangers needed defense. I get it. Brandon Schneider is a interesting depth, third pair kind of guy. Obviously, 23. There's still some room for development here, but I think that aside from his penalty kill numbers, which were actually very, very strong, so far, there isn't a ton here that gets me excited defensively. His offensive numbers have taken a pretty big jump year over year, right? Like his in terms of production, in terms of productivity, his offensive numbers have jumped up, and I do think that if he can, he can be a very sneaky, depth offensive creator on this team, right? He can be very much like, I think that there's a possibility here. Again, like, he hasn't been given the power play time, so this isn't necessarily a one-for-one comparison, but in terms of what Gustafsson did in New York when he was there, Brandon Schneider could kind of fill that role, at least from a 5-on-5 perspective, if his offense can continue to develop, right? Like, just somebody that, his first year in 22-23, the offense numbers were not very good, and his overall value to the team wasn't very good. He's improved his offense year over year, and he's been given a bit of a bigger role, so his defensive numbers have taken a bit of a hit. But it's somebody that, if he can be like a secondary offensive guy on this blue line, it could help elevate what the ceiling is for this blue line, right? We talked about like what Scott Morrow, for instance, could do, but Brandon Schneider could be a very underrated guy that could lift up the floor of this blue line if he can become a bit of a secondary offensive guy and kind of a sneaky secondary offensive guy for this team. Will Borgen is a very interesting player, right? Phil Borgen last season in Seattle was a very strong, middle of the lineup defender. And then last year happened and everything fell apart. Like, just everything about his game just tanked. And I'm highlighting Will Borgen here for a reason, right? Usually I've avoided the players that just aren't good, who aren't, big, name guys. Like, I've just kind of haven't talked about them a ton throughout this series. But Will Borgen is interesting to me because I do potentially see a world where the Mike Sullivan system can get some more value out of Will Borgen than the Peter Laviolette system did last year. And what we saw from him, in Seattle 2 years ago was, again, a very strong middle of the lineup defender, defenseman. I do think that if he can get back to that type of level, Will Borgen does bring some interesting value to this blue line, right? And I think that's like Carson Soucy. I don't think is going to get back to where he was, a couple of years ago, or the potential we saw, even when he was in Minnesota. But I do think that Will Borgen still has something in there, and I think that defensemen who just completely fall off a cliff like that, a lot of the times it's just systematic, and you put them in a better system, and then they can a system that's more suited to their game, and you can see that bounce back, right? Like we really saw that in Florida last year, right? Like we saw the Nate Schmidt bounce back after being in a system that really didn't suit his game and not having a clear role in the Jets. Going back to a Paul Maurice system, and then all of a sudden Nate Schmidt is a extremely useful middle of the lineup defender, and I could see that happening here with Will Borgen. No, do I think it's am I predicting it to happen? Not necessarily, but if you can get even like back to being a competent league average defender or defenseman, then yeah, I think that Will Borgen could have some value here on the Rangers overall. So just a guy to kind of keep an eye on here. And finally, you have Scott Morrow, who was, the player that came back in the trade, with K'Andre Miller here, and it really does, like, people freaked out when Scott Morrow's name was added to this, but like, he was the second round pick, 40th overall, right? Like, it wasn't middle of the second round ish. It wasn't like they invested a ton into him here with the Hurricanes, so I get that, it's a fun name because he's had, a pretty solid development track here, but I'm not as, I don't believe that Scott Morrow is some, great first pair defenseman that everybody seemed to think he was when that trade happened. We'll talk about what I think about K'Andre Miller in a bit, when we get to the Hurricanes, but in terms of, this half of it, I think Scott Morrow is a good defenseman. I think he can develop into a pretty strong, second pair kind of guy. But I don't see the crazy, star potential player who's going to be, a top pair guy carrying the team. Like, I think that his ceiling is basically what K'Andre Miller could be. I think their ceilings are similar in terms of what their rules could be, and I think K'Andre Miller's might be a bit higher. So I don't think this was some terrible deal by the Hurricanes. I do think it's decent value for the Rangers, especially if they're moving off of K'Andre Miller, right? Like, I think that you get Scott Morrow, who's significantly younger and cheaper at this moment, and I think that his offensive ceiling is pretty high. So I definitely don't think that it was a bad pickup, but I don't think it was some crazy fleece that some people thought it was when the trade happened. We'll talk about K'Andre Miller in a bit, and I'll break down more thoughts on that. Now, do I think K'Andre Miller is the best fit for the Rangers? No. I think that, moving off of him made sense for the Rangers, and I understand it from that perspective, and I don't think the trade is bad, really, for either team. But, again, I'll talk about Carolina, so if you want to fight me on that, wait till that video comes out. But yeah, I think Scott Morrow is a big X factor on this team, right? We talked about the young kids on this Rangers team. We talked about Gabe Perreault and Othman. I think Scott Morrow can be added to that group, right? I think those three players, if they can all, develop and improve and be big contributors to the Rangers this season, then New York is going to find success, right? I think it'd be very, very hard for this team to miss the playoffs if those three players can, bring the value that that they're going to be asked to bring to this team. If they can't do that, then the Rangers could be in trouble overall. And I think that again, I think the floor on this team is pretty high, even if that doesn't happen. So I think they'll still be in that playoff mix, but I definitely think if this team wants to make some noise, those three players need to, execute the roles that they're going to be asked to play in. And I have faith in all of them doing so. But it's just that's the biggest question for this team is, can those young players be contributors to this roster? Because the last time the Rangers had a bunch of really young kids come up and have to be contributors in order for the Rangers to have success, two of them ended up not being on the team anymore. So it's it makes this an interesting situation because it's kind of like the next shot at that, and we'll see how that works out. And I have faith in these guys, but I definitely think that that's the biggest question mark in terms of what the overall success of the Rangers is going to look like by the end of the season. Finally, we talk about the goalies, and I mean, Igor Shesterkin is going to be in that the best goalie in the league conversation for sure. You have Jonathan Quick, who I also think is a solid backup, although he did take a step back last year, but he's old, so that's fine. I think that for what they got out of Jonathan Quick last year, if he can do that again, he's fine as a backup. But Igor Shesterkin is really the live and die player for this team, and the Rangers have definitely lived off of him for the last number of years. I mean, he has been one of the best goalies in the league here, and I definitely think that he's been consistent throughout throughout this year. He's had a ton of quality starts. He's very good on the uneven strength. He's extremely exceptional on the power play, on the penalty kill. And, at the end of the day, if the Rangers, again, we talk about the young kids and how much their success is going to mean to this team. But, I mean, if Igor Shesterkin is, one of the best goalies in the league, then the Rangers are going to have a shot to be very, very good. And if Igor Shesterkin isn't one of the best goalies in the league, then they won't be, right? Like, their success is going to be very dependent on Igor continuing to be consistent, and he hasn't really shown me any reason to not believe that he'll be consistent throughout, his run here. So, I mean, if he's a top 3 goalie in the NHL, then the Rangers should, like, their floor is extremely high, right? It's very hard to be a bad team with a, top 3 goalie in the league. The Ducks did it for a bit, but, he is definitely like maybe the most important. He's easily the most important part of this team, right? As good as Panarin is and Adam Fox is, Igor Shesterkin is the MVP of this team, and he is going to be asked to have another big season this year, and I've no doubt that he'll be able to do it. Finally, we look at the special teams here a little bit, and it's a group that I like. I think that there's enough interesting players here. Obviously, the power play, the first line power play is very, very good. With guys like JT Miller, Vincent Trocheck, who also puts up decent power play numbers. Because Zibanejad is again inconsistent, but he can be a good 5th option on the power play. Adam Fox is there. He's great at everything. He's very good at being a power play quarterback. You have Panarin, who obviously is Ontario Panarin, who we talked about earlier. But the penalty kill does get a big boost with Gavrikov. Like, he is a very solid, defensive, penalty kill guy, and I think that's going to be a big thing for this team, for a team that had their issues last year on the power play or on the penalty kill. I think that paired with again Mike Sullivan's system that has been traditionally decent at creating good penalty killers. The Rangers special team should be pretty good overall at the end of the season. And there we go. That is all I have for team number 12 on my preseason power rankings. We have 11 more of these to go. We're almost there. The NHL season's almost here too. It's very exciting. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked the video, give it a like. Make sure you comment down below. Let me know what you think of the New York Rangers. It's a team that, again, I think should be a playoff team this year. And anything less than that, I think, is a pretty big disappointment for this team. And it was last season, but missing the playoffs 2 years in a row with Shesterkin, Fox, and Panarin would be not a good thing for this this core. It would really take down what their expectations should be. But for me, the Rangers should be a playoff team, especially in a Metro that is pretty wide open from top to bottom, really. But let me know what you think down below. Make sure you subscribe so you catch the last 11 videos on the series. Go watch the other ones if you haven't watched them yet. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.